let's jump in. To start out, tell us more about yourself, where you grew up, what your life was like as a kid.
So it's like I'm from Arizona, so I grew up during the whole construction boom out here. Arizona's really expanded quite a bit, and being able to witness that has been quite a feat. I think we're one of the counties that are most widespread out. And I grew up in Goodyear, Arizona, which is probably about 40 minutes from where I'm at. Earliest memories were just a lot of desert. There's a lot of desert out there, you know. I went to Avondale Elementary, where my grandma, she was the cook there. She also was a cook there for like 25 years. She retired from there. It was pretty cool stuff. I had a grandpa who passed away early in life, so my first 5 years of my life were spent primarily with my grandpa a lot because he watched me during the day while my parents worked. My parents met at Freya High School, which is also in Avondale, Goodyear area. And my mom, I have an older brother who's 3.5 years older than I am. My mom was a young mom. She had my brother at 16, had me at 19. And my dad um, early on was got in the construction field and then got into sales. My mom worked as a secretary at Unit Dynamics out in Goodyear, and then got into telecommunications, when long distance networking, um, long distance, that stuff really expanded in the early 90s. A lot of what I got involved in when I was younger was trouble. I was definitely one of the kids that couldn't sit in the classroom very long. I I experienced two things that stand out as quite traumatic as a kid. Which, I wasn't one of those kids who were abused. I wasn't one of those kids who were molested. I didn't grow up having that type of trauma, but my trauma was that, my grandfather passed away and that my parents got a divorce very early on. The divorce impacted me to such a degree where, it was, yeah, I had left with the choice as a young kid to choose between parents was, my torment. And so I was really big into swimming. I had just about every allergy you can name. I had asthma. I was on breathing treatments. So, my choice of sport was like swimming, or anything that was indoors because the hives and allergies put me on the breathing machine or in the hospital countless times. And so by the age of 7, my behavior had probably gotten so much so out of control that, I was introduced to, St. Luke's, which was like my first psychiatric facility. I was given the diagnosis of ADHD. And at the time, the standard treatment for ADHD in a young adolescent was Ritalin, right? And so I was on Ritalin from ages of 8 till I was about 13, and I still couldn't sit in a class, right? Um, and my first introduction to an officer was when, my parents got divorced and they were going through that. My mom would, I would watch her. She would struggle to, find us, really good safe housing, good toys, good clothes. As she was elevating her career in life, her early start was met with, poverty. And I remember what I would do is I would take the price tags off the cheap toys and I'd put them on the expensive toys, in the supermarkets. So that way, because I identified as a kid, I'm like, well, this has got to be the solution. And I remember, sitting down with an officer in the back room, talking about how this is stealing and you can't do this. And, um, I don't know if there's just about not anything I didn't do as a kid as far as trouble. I really like to run. To be honest, I think I only felt bad when I got caught. Um, I used to run away from home a lot when my parents would fight. My mom tells me this story. I was in my crib and her and my dad were arguing, and I never saw anything physical. But I was in my room. I climbed out of, I got off my bed and I pushed my toy box against the wall, climbed up my toy box, climbed out the window, pushed the doghouse against the fence, climbed up on the fence, and ran 3 streets over to stay with, one of my mom's friends. Stories like that were pretty common for me, where I would go missing for hours, climbing trees and, hiding and, um, and so, yeah. Early memories are also, I would stay up. Like, I don't know if you remember a show called Taxi. There's a show called Taxi, and I remember it would come on at 10 o'clock, and then Cheers would come on at 10:30, and then Star Trek would come on, at 11. And at 11, that was my sign that my parents were asleep, and yeah, I would dress in this little ninja outfit, and 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I would terrorize the neighborhood late at night. And the cops would catch me and bring me home. And, truancy was a common theme.
What do you think was driving those early behaviors? It sounds like maybe when you were little, running from
Mhm.
some conflict or escape from the conflict of your parents, but it sounds like it was broader than that. What do you think was going on for you?
Well, yeah, I think it was definitely, an emotional response to my environment. I think that having to choose between parents at a very young age was, my dad leaving, right? So, fear of abandonment, fear of, I'm sorry, fear of abandonment, fear of, social interactions, having to make indecision, just being indecisive, a lot of the times. I struggled to sit still. And I'm sure it didn't have anything to do with the Ritalin, right? Like, I try to wrap my head around it knowing that I've done all the studies on it and it's actually a stimulant. And if my trouble was sitting in one place and you gave me a stimulant, it just didn't seem, something doesn't add up for me, like with that whole thing. And of course, I'm not a pharmacologist, but yeah, so, age 14, my mom had had enough. She sent me over to live with my dad's. I went to live with my dad into going into my freshman year of high school. And, I found out that, smoking weed was, like the thing, right? So that was my deal. That was my jam. Smoking weed and, hanging out with that kind of crowd. I learned how to steal cars. So I started stealing cars at a very young age, 14, 15 years of age. They were just things that I did not have. Like some kids at school had cars. I didn't have one, but on the weekends it just felt cool and free and um never got in trouble with stealing cars at a young age. Um, but I did get caught, smoking weed, on school grounds. I was suspended my freshman year, got kicked out. Um, and so that was it. I dropped out of school at age 15. But I did have another stint at Charter Behavioral Health, which was at age 13. I did that inpatient program for, 4 or 5 months. And then, with the truancy from school, getting kicked out of school, not going to school, I ran away. So by the time I was 16, the cops knocked on my brother's door and I went into another rehabilitation at Wendy Payne O'Brien. Wendy Payne O'Brien was a BHRS right in the Arcadia district, and I stayed there for a year until I aged out. So at the end of at my age 16, going into 17, I aged out in treatment as an adult. And I remember getting my own place, um, having a job at Wendy's, then got a job at Blockbuster Video, but smoking a lot of pot still. I picked up my first weed charge at age 18 back in 1997. I got caught with an ounce of pot, and that ounce serviced me into a great program. It's a great diversion program called Drug Court. Drug Court is still around today. It's definitely a good diversion for a lot of people, but wasn't for me. And I continued to smoke weed. I had this prosthetic unit that I used to utilize all the time, that, could cheat my UAs. And I got through a good portion of drug court, and then I dropped another dirty, and then they violated me. They threw me in jail for 3 months, and they put me on standard probation. It was then I didn't hesitate. I used the prosthetic unit to, deliver my UAs to task for probably about a good 2 years. And then my last 6 months, as I was, transitioning off of probation, my PO said that, you just smoke weed. I have so much other stuff going on. I'm not too really concerned about anything. Just stay out of trouble. And I was at a party, and I had a joint in my fifth pocket, and police came to the party for some kind of ruckus or whatever. But I was the one that got searched. So they found a joint in my fifth pocket. That joint violated me, threw me in jail for 3 months, and reinstated me on standard probation. So, for an ounce in the joint, I did, 6 months in jail, paid, you know, I don't know, $3,000 in fines, and did 5.5 years of standard probation. And that was the law back then. I know we shake our heads now, and, with those that, smoke weed today, it's like, you're welcome, right? Because there was so many cases like that clogging up our system that they eventually lightened the sentencing guidelines and then legalized marijuana. Um, so that was my first introduction to, the courts as far as probation, and having a designated felony, three class six felonies on my record by the age of, 21.
All
And
for
but
marijuana.
yeah, for marijuana, yes. I'd already accumulated somewhat of a record though as a juvenile. I mean, I had officers come to my house for crimes that I did that, I denied, obviously. Um, but my early 20s uh really weren't so bad. I did work. I did sell quite an extensive amount of marijuana. Um, and I loved bartending, um, working out and working in the nightlife. I did all that. I started a courier business early, like around like age 23, called Roadrunner Title Delivery Services. I catered to mortgage companies at the time. This is like the pre-08 crash that really closed off a lot of independent mortgage companies. So I delivered, everything from plans and blueprints for construction companies to, titles for title companies and mortgage documents that needed to be, closed by the end of, by the end of the day at 5 o'clock, right? So there was a time delivery service. I enjoyed that for like a good 3 years. Went out to a courier convention um, out in Coronado Island and met, people that had the bike messenger services. I met so many people, but what I did meet is these individuals that, created the software. It was called Courier Complete. It was about $180,000. When you're thinking '03, '02, and you're thinking paperless, right? It's like cutting edge. And I got to know these guys pretty well. They told me that they would send out a rep to my area. They would give me the software for about 80 grand. And that would have catapulted my career business to, the next level it needed to go to. So what I did is I told them I didn't have that type of money. So, in any business, you do this thing, it's called risk management. Mine was illegal. I went and down to Tucson and I picked up 50 pounds of marijuana and called my friend's dad in Chicago and told him I needed some things to do, that I wanted some things to talk about as far as business. And I got busted by the DEA in the next state over on the I-40 train station. So it's by this time, though I'd already developed a cocaine habit, an alcohol problem from working in the nightlife. And at this point, when I bonded out, I was down to $100 to my name and I had bills to pay. So I leaned more into cocaine than I did anything else. Um, within a year, within a year and a half, I had a truck, two cars, a condo in Scottsdale, a dog, and within a year and a half, I woke up in a stolen car. Um, stealing cars, committing armed robberies. Um, within a year. And I did my first prison sentence on two stolen cars, two theft of means. Um, and I'd picked up now five felony convictions by the age of 26. And I went to prison in '07 and got out in 2000, October of 2009. My prison experience really wasn't bad. Back in 2010, they changed the internal risk laws, or some kind of legislative thing went through where you can't be housed with family on the same yard, right? So I was housed with my brother for about 2 years of that time, and it sure makes time a whole lot easier if you have family, on the yard with you. So I smoked weed here nor there in my first bit of incarceration, and and uh, and when I got out, I got out before my brother did, and I was smoking crack within a week of my release. There was at the time there was, it's nobody's fault but my own, and I'm 100% accountable for what happens to me in my life. But there was no reentry wasn't a hot topic. Like there wasn't resources beating down my door trying to, let me know like, hey, these are the things you're gonna need. This is what we can do. No, overwhelmed by anxiety, and um, and plus I paroled to my mom's house, which I don't encourage anybody to do. I don't encourage anybody to parole back home to where it's comfortable. Crawl out of the depths, go to a halfway house. If it's not the right halfway house, go to a different one and find what's going to work for you, because you're going to appreciate, life so much more if you give yourself the opportunity with a changed heart to overcome these reentry barriers. Instead, I brought, this institutionalization back home with my mom, and I was smoking crack within a week. And went and checked myself into the Maverick House. It's a residential substance abuse treatment program. And after that, I stepped down to Crossroads. At the time, Crossroads was not a treatment program, it was a halfway house. And so, from treatment to halfway house, I started working at Pure Fitness. At the time, this is like 2000, beginning of 2010. And I found out that I really liked helping people. I really liked helping people. And it was like one of the happiest moments of my life is, having the opportunity to go to a gym and help people meet their fitness goals and stuff. Like I really identified with that. And it didn't take much on my part because I already liked working out. Other than Pure Fitness kind of like being like almost like a Ponzi scheme for personal trainers. I mean, you had to live there to make money. But it was okay, and it suited its purpose. And so I had met a girl. and we moved into an apartment. And it was just, Bill W. talks about it in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, this phenomenon of craving, right? Where, I was just, I enrolled in school, which I probably shouldn't have done because that was, a little bit overwhelming. I enrolled in three classes, having that grandiosity kind of take root early in recovery, which just was not a good move. Having an apartment, working that, schedule, I got overwhelmed. And then one day I was just like, I looked at the maintenance man, not to throw stereotypes or anything. I was like, I bet you that dude can get me some crack, and that's what happened. I asked him and he was like, yep. And so I was hiding the cocaine addiction. Um, I ended up getting a job elsewhere, but that didn't last long either before I finally had relapsed. And it's amazing how like the addict's mind will think, right? Because um, from the apartment, I moved into a condo with this gal, and I had spent probably about $2,500 over a period of 2 weeks on cocaine. And anybody in their right mind, probably would be like, okay, I need help, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. Maybe I should stop cocaine. Um, but I was like, that Friday when I got my check, I was like, hey, if I want to save money, maybe I should just get some meth, right? You know? So I went and got some meth, and I didn't show up for work the following Monday. By Thursday, I had already had this desperate moment in my life where I knew that I didn't want to be homeless out there on the street looking for stolen cars or that or whatever. And so I elevated my criminal behavior and started committing, mass burglaries. Within 3 months, I'd committed 32 burglaries in 3 months on my community. Um, and I was absolutely miserable as a human being and doing miserable things. And it was the Heat Squad had caught on to me. I was roped, which they called this the repeat offenders program. And so within 3 months of a significant relapse on cocaine and methamphetamine, I'd accumulated a 12-year prison sentence with a 3-year probation tail. And um, going through the county system, it's amazing how the ego will try to hold on to what it can. I remember pacing back and forth in my cell in Fourth Avenue, um, walking back and forth the night before court, thinking about what is it I'm going to say? What is it I'm going to do? What I'm really thinking about is how can I control the outcome, right? And really, I had no control over the outcome, but yet I still had this ego that drove all these substance use and behaviors that were empowering me to try to think that I had some semblance of control over what was going to happen to me. I remember the arresting officer, after he punched me in the side of the face, he said that you're going to do 10 years, no less. Right. And I was like thinking, I was like, well, he's not the judge or the jury or anything. But in Arizona, you don't have a judge or jury. It's a prosecutor state. And there's this thing called mandatory minimums that if you have priors, there's only a certain bracket or sentencing guideline that you'll be amended to. And I remember thinking that my bracket was 6.5 to 13.5. And it was actually the biggest bracket in non-dangerous, non-repetitive. It was the biggest bracket I had to choose from. But when the prosecutor brought my plea agreement, it said 10 years. And then about 6 months into my county time, the officers came again and said they had more DNA evidence. So they swabbed me, and an additional 2 years and 3 years probation was added to my sentence. Um, I remember showing up to a settlement conference after like 13 months, And she walked over to me and she said, Jeremy, you have three victims. If I see you here in court again, I'll revoke your plea, try you in court for all three cases, and you'll do 32 years. And
Oh,
I was, yeah. So I signed for the 12 years, and I deserve to go to prison for what I did. Absolutely. So it was a tough pill to swallow. And courtrooms are like a good sign for where you're going in life. And what I mean by this is that when I I remember when I went to court for the marijuana charges. I had, my family there, a lot of family there. Um, my stolen car, I had a few family members there. But when you go into prison for 12 years and you're in that courtroom, I had two people left in my corner. Uh, and that was the girl, and by the way, her name's Marlo. And then I had my dad, the man who I always had longed to have a relationship with as a result of being feeling abandoned as a kid. There he is, right? Which I think is incredible, being that he did visit me often throughout the course of my incarceration.
and what was going
Um,
through your head in that courtroom? So many people talk about, starting with a lot of people and then it narrows and narrows and narrows. And
yeah.
with your dad there, what was going through your mind?
Um, well, like I said, I still had this drive, right? To try to minimize, the sentencing. Even though I signed a plea, I still had made mention and highlighted, substance use and mental health within the courtroom as a driving force behind, these behaviors because I don't I don't steal, I don't break into houses. I have these things, they're called values, I learned a lot about the survival reinforcement and control circuits and the biology behind the brain while incarcerated, which actually helped me remove a lot of judgment. But I remember a lot of guilt and shame. And I remember, just hot flashes of, what is this going to look like? Lots of fear, um, that regardless of whether people were there or not, I felt alone. Um, and, but also like on the other side of it, I felt responsible. Like I did this. This is what's going to happen, and you shouldn't have been doing what you were doing, and you should have asked for help. I think asking for help is probably one of the most vulnerable things one can do. I mean, you literally have to be cornered into some type of desperate measures where, normal people would pull over and ask for directions. Where my life with drugs and alcohol was going in circles,
Mm.
with, the stops within the institutions. Um, so after 13 months in county, they gave me that back time. And then I ended up, let me see if I'm following the question and guidelines here. Okay, so what we were getting to is probably the turning point, right? Of the questions you said, it says here, what was the turning point for you? Well, after 13 months of county, I hit Cimarron prison. And Cimarron is that's like the toughest yard we have here in the system. Um, at the time in 2013, it was the toughest yard. I mean, somebody had gotten killed before I had gotten there, and then there was a lot of staff assaults going on, and lots of drugs. Just, I mean, even the cops, right? Like, I mean, it was just a cesspool. And so and then I witnessed somebody get murdered in our pod, right? His name was Christian Frost, and the interesting thing about this guy is that he did 20 years in general population, and he was supposed to be going home in 6 months. And he died over the jealousy of the dope, right? Like he had the dope and people got jealous, and because he didn't want to break him off, they killed him. And because of all this activity, they had maxed our yard out. I was on a 3 yard, but they maxed it out. So when they max it out, you go to level 5 quick, on the same yard. They just no movement. And they are gonna let us out and down in phases. Um, I remember since I just got there, I didn't really have anything. So, I sat in the cell with a cellmate, and then after a couple of days, he went home. He was released. So I was in this cell by myself, and I mean, I just remember literally just feeling like insane, like literally, like you know, off 12 years, you do 85%, so it's like 10 and a quarter years. So I had still 9 years, 9 years to go here. And I'm feeling very hopeless. Um, I'd already criticized myself enough into a corner. Um, and it was like 3 weeks of, they let us out to shower once every 3 days. But it was after like 3 weeks where this particular incident, which became the real turning point for me, was they let me out to go to the shower. It was during shift change and they were short staffed. So I sat in there for 4 hours in a 3x3, 3x3 shower. And it's one of those ones where you push the button and it blazes steam and hot water for like 10 seconds and then it turns off. So you have to constantly, it was like, it was tumultuous. Like it was, you look up and there's like, it's an old prison. So there's mold on the ceiling. And I think I just hit this moment of desperation where I just realized that like I'm like spiritually sick. Um, and no matter how dirty that shower was, I was in there, obviously by myself, but I hit my knees and, I don't know what's your spiritual path or what other people's spiritual path is, but I believe it's whatever it is, it's personal. And it's very intimate and it's very sacred. Um, and I just remember crying out, asking like, what is it, And I realized, and either I was so spectacularly ignorant of my self-defeating behavior for so many years, I just realized I was somebody who just didn't love themselves, and that was what my message was. My message was clear. Um, and the message is either that here you are special, you don't love yourself, let me show you how. Um, and I didn't know if like maybe I was just talking to myself or whatever it is, but I it's been the driving force behind changing my life ever since. This search for meaning and purpose and happiness by putting love into the things that I do and that I'm committed to. So I woke up real quick, and that was like you call it your moment of clarity. We call it a God shot in recovery. Um, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" I was like, I remember thinking, I was like, "Man, prison ain't nothing but time out for men who don't love themselves." I was like, people, because it's like the logic like started kicking in. I don't know if like my prefrontal had finally met its match at age 35, but I was like, I was like, people that love themselves don't put themselves in harm's way. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen to good people. It just people that love themselves aren't gonna, you know, commit burglary or do drugs or, do the things that I had been committed to since I was, 14 years old, right? Um, and that was a life of doing drugs and doing crime. I mean, plain and simple. Even I could call my early 20s what I want, but I was transporting drugs and selling psychedelics, there was there's no history of a reflection of self-love. Maybe reflections of discipline in exercise routines, maybe eating right, but truly no consistent pattern of self-love, self-worth, and self-growth, personal development, and all the things that I try to do my best to strategize in my life each and every day. Um, so it was at that moment, with 9 years left remaining, I committed myself to peer recovery. At the time, Thornell wasn't there. It was, gosh, what was his name? It doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. Let's just say he doesn't matter. But they didn't open doors for us to teach classes you know, for peer-to-peer education. But what they did have is that after this yard was just they started lightening up, their privileges. I was sent to East Unit by and East Unit was in Florence. So I'm no longer in Tucson. I'm in Florence. I'm a little bit closer to home, and that's when Dad and my significant other, she started visiting me regularly, and I met a lifer who was engaged in his own form of peer programming that the officers had nothing to do with. The culture at the time was dog eat dog, screw the cops. Don't, don't let them into our world, period, ever. Matter of fact, if they say hi to you, don't say hi back. I mean, it was real clear cut and dry. So what I found was is a Hazelden manual. This lifer taught me how to, like give me an introductory thing to facilitating group or classes. He said you have to go out and find your own students. I went out and found about eight students on the yard, and I held my first relapse prevention course back in 2013. And based on the feedback, like being disconnected to our values was the greatest thing that each and one of these participants over years of studying um, was came to terms with, right? So most of my facilitating in my group classes are getting connected to your values and creating SMART goals as a result of those values. And what does it mean to accomplish, putting love into your values with good intentions. So I did that for a number of years. Um, and then in 2017, well, 2016, I went through the Kingman riots. I went from East Unit to Kingman. And then from Kingman, we went to Red Rock, opened up Red Rock. And this is where it gets interesting because 2016 at Red Rock, I met Principal Navarre. Principal Navarre, the fact that they had a principal on a prison yard at this private prison complex, I found shocking. But I was like, cool, I'll talk to this guy. He's not security, he's not staff. And he started asking me about what my educational goals were. And I said, look, man, you're talking to somebody who failed at every single, I was like, my earliest memories is being dragged from school district to school district. And my mom always sticking up for me, like saying that you're just not teaching them right. But literally failed. I was in every magnet program, charter school, kicked out, suspended, threw firecrackers at a girl's hair once, like it was bad, right? Like, so, not much school record to speak on, but, when I was 19, I did go take my GED through Rio Salado and I passed it on my first go around. So how of not being in school from age 14 to 19 and then, passing the GED, I think my parents were just as shocked as I was. So here I am talking to Mr. Navarre about, pursuing my education. And he got me on the phone with Calissa Hand from the Incarcerated Distance Learning Program for Rio Salado. They're one of the only print-based material colleges within our system. So I got my associate's degree in applied science, co-occurring substance use disorders, level 1 and level 2 certifications. And then I got certifications in workforce development and community reentry, took that 18 credit course as well, which is, and I'm a member of PTK. today. I'm the VP of Public Relations and Communications for Phi Theta Kappa Omicron out of Rio Salado in Arizona.
That's
It's a,
amazing.
it's a young person's fun. It's a fun thing though. It's a lot of fun. Um, but I didn't know that I was gonna earn a college degree and get a 4.0, grade point average through, Rio Salado. So that was a really cool experience to not only gain that education, but in 2017, when central office came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to do this thing called the Recovery Support Specialist Program." It was the first of its kind, entered into the system. And so I was the first cohort, first of 20 to get certified in recovery support in the incarceral system in Arizona. And me and another peer support started the Second Chance reentry program at the time it was Eagle Point, where that's where they had created this like resource center. They brought in staff, and we brought in out these outside resources. And I still had 4 years remaining on my sentence. Um, and being around people that are going home every day was a real struggle, so I experienced some after about 18 groups a week and 2.5 years of being a recovery support specialist. They didn't really have like this. I didn't know what being burned out was from helping people. And when you live where you work, it's a nonstop thing, right? So I decided to take a step back, went to Hickman's Family Farm, saved some money to get out with, and then I was voluntold to go to Alhambra, um, where and I spent my last 11 months at Alhambra, which is Phoenix intake. So anybody that's coming into the system, we provided that safe environment there for them to, you know, get introduced to the justice system or go through the process of recidivism. Um, I learned a lot from becoming a recovery support specialist. I learned that, like meeting people where they're at, loving them where they're at. Um, Removed a lot of that stereotypical bias that, us in the prison subculture have, like look at that dope fiend, can't stop getting high. Well, that's me. Like the last time I checked, that's me, right? So like it really removed a lot of that simple, it made recovery look more approachable, more simple. So I was released November 18th, 2021, and I had accumulated, all these years of sobriety while incarcerated. Um, and I thought, well, how am I like I was able to stay, sorry, I was able to stay sober while in prison. How am I going to stay sober out here in society? Well, here's the thing, like this 3.5 years that I've been out, this is the longest I've been sober in society since I was 14. Like, yeah, I'm thankfully hitting 13 and a half years of continuous sobriety from drugs and alcohol. Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, yeah, working in the field of recovery. Um, so when I was released, I had questions about like how am I going to acclimate this new way of life and new way of looking? Because when you do, 15 to 17 years of incarceration, including prison and county time, you look at the world differently, and it doesn't go away. It does not go away. My perceived things, everything I do, everywhere I go, is always coming from a position of safety because I think a lot of it comes from the state of hypervigilance for so long, always waiting for the next shoe to drop. So when I walk into places, I face the door. Doesn't matter where I sit. I can't sit by the dish room. I know that's typical for a lot of people, but everything is always navigated from a position of safety. So I don't feel like, and I do get like dismissive attachment. Like if I'm not feeling like I want to just run, I want to, separate myself immediately. So I have a great support system of people in my life that help me identify that if I get any social anxieties, still to this day. Um, I remember, every year I talk to some friends at a friends and family Thanksgiving, right? I went to them back in 2010 before I got this lengthy sentence. So, but every year I would call, and um, the gal that rode this out with me is now my wife. Her name is Marlo Profita, and she's got quite a story. If you want to hear one, she's never been to prison, but she sure has dealt with a whole lot as far as the justice system. She visited me at every prison every 2 weeks, no matter where I ended up. Um, so I was released, and I went to this friends and family party, not to be all over the place, but she's like, I immediately recognized somebody who kept going back and forth to the bathroom at this party. And I was like, yeah, I know what they're up to, like I know what they're doing. And I just minded my business, real quiet, reserved. He comes up to me right when we're getting ready to eat, and he's like, hey, man, he's like, do you want a beer? I'm like, bro, I don't drink, Yeah. And I remember him looking at me like I was a foreigner. Like, like I felt like a foreigner, right? Like I just got done traveling like in another country for a long time, and here I am. I need directions. And he goes, why don't you drink? I said, do you want the truth? And then he looked at me with the same like preponderance of like curiosity, right? Just absolute curiosity. And he goes, yeah, I want the truth. I said, man, the truth is that if I drink, then I don't walk back and forth to the bathroom all night doing cocaine. I will actually go and smoke cocaine. And when I run out of money, I break into houses just like this one. So, I mean, that's my story. So I'm sticking to it. I don't drink. And he was so shocked, but he was like really thankful I didn't drink. He was shocked to know that knew that he was doing cocaine, and going back and forth. I was like, I told him, I was like, man, that's just not my story. So, have fun, it's just not for me. So it was at that moment though, like I realized like it's okay to be honest about myself, where I come from, what my story is, what I do. Um, I got a job moving furniture when I got out, but I knew I wanted my I wanted to help my community. So I started with North Site Recovery, and I had a really good set of mentors. My set of mentors were Dr. Rettel, who's had 20 years in the Medicaid experience, and Dr. Pierce, who's a psychologist. Her husband, Jeremy Bloom, who's the CEO of Northsight, he was a CBI executive for CBI for a number of years. And it was a new organization, so I was able to lean into them, my first year into working in this space. So I had good training. Um, I went from doing peer support, case management, all the way to admissions. I left Northside Recovery as an admissions specialist, but I was the only one in the admissions team, right?
Wow.
I graduated parole. I was put on probation. Um, and you never know like how God's going to work, right? My probation officer kept asking me questions. She'd been in with the probation department for about 4.5 years. And she was like, hey, I'm really thinking about leaving in the probation department and, getting in the helping field. And so she went from me reporting to her reporting to me at Northside Recovery. We had the privilege of working together for 2 years. Today, she's one of my really good, close, dear friends, and she's my former PO.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, and also my former warden, right? We're close. We're friends, um, it's an interesting dichotomy, when you're inside and both of you are in a position to want to be helping people, but yet you don't really want to work together. But then out here, this is just what we do, right? Reentry is our jam. We come together as a community. So after Northsight, I kind of oversold myself a little bit and became a director at an outpatient at a level one psych facility at Valley Hospital. Um, I could say I oversold myself a little bit only because I wasn't ready to take on the responsibilities of like culture, right? The existing culture had gone through four directors in the last 4 years. So I knew the culture was, needed some work. So I just maintained my consistency and being, who I am. And I unfortunately, I just, after 4 months, I just realized that level one psychiatric facilities, I'm going to go back to co-occurring and substance use, and integrated care.
Hmm.
Hospital care is not for me. So I started here as the director of justice integration for sanctuary recovery centers. And, one of the things I told Joey, I said, please just let me do whatever it is I'm going to do, and I will produce outcomes. And since I've been here, even today, right, we got an announcement that I've had the privilege of, working on closing out my first government contract with the Office of the Administration of the Courts. When you sit at a prison desk and you think about helping people and you're doing your schoolwork, you didn't know that you're going to be building bridges through government contracts to service juvenile at-risk youth.
It's amazing.
Yeah, you didn't. I just didn't know. And so I also have, help implement our reentry program. Joey and I's vision are in alignment when it comes to the justice population. So, we've been able to do a lot. Um, we had an existing core program. This core program is community outreach resources and education. And it was just kind of sitting there. And I thought that it would be a good idea if we, paired up with another justice agency called the Juvenile Transfer Offender Program. They have LPCs that are embedded within treatment court. And these are adolescents who picked up serious felonies who are transferring over to adult probation. So, as they make that transfer, we have embedded, we're still in the pilot phase, but I think this next meeting, we're going to be moving out of pilot phase and into another courtroom and taking on another probation officer's caseload. Um, and we have implemented case management and peer support to walk alongside this youth. And we've already produced like really good outcomes. Kids graduating high school, getting jobs, getting involved more in the community, doing workforce development. It's been incredible to watch. Some of these kids didn't even have insurance, so getting them access to care.
Hmm.
Yeah, getting them, helping the family out with food boxes, taking them to job interviews, taking them to, yeah, their reports are incredible. Helping the families get access to utility assistance. You know, when a kid shows up to court with his family and they sit there and then they walk in the courtroom, you don't know anything about them outside that courtroom. You only know their crime. Um, you have to, the amount of trust our case manager had to build with a couple of these individuals before they finally let them in, right? And now they have a friend to walk alongside them to help them navigate. Uh, um, we didn't have that, um, but it's really, really cool to witness.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that we're involved in within the justice system. I created a relationship with the Reach Out program. Reach Outs are LCSWs that are within the probation department that do ASAMs, right? They do ASAMs, and they generate a referral to us. As a result of solidifying that partnership, now the Office of the Public Defender has really leaned into us too to help on the front end, help mitigate sentencing, divert sentencing for those that qualify for probation to get them out early. So, having the opportunity, I guess, to pop someone's door feels so good, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it feels so good. It was just recently I went down to I filled in for transportation, and this guy comes out and he's got that county strut, he's like, "Yo, who you?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm the dude who got your door popped. It's actually taken a couple of months. I hope you're doing all right." He goes, "What do you mean you got my door popped?" I was like, then I told him about the justice process, right? Where somebody does their mitigation, does their packet, you qualify for probation. What program do you meet? Do you meet the criteria for rehabilitation? And then you got somebody advocating for yourself on the back end to have us be where we're at today, to where we finally get to introduce ourselves to each other. Pretty cool stuff.
yeah,
He's
it's
like, "Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool stuff." So, yeah, we just got this letter back from the AOC today. I'd love to, let me see here. I'd be happy to share the first line of it as why went out to lunch. And we've gotten letters of recommendations from the probation department concerning the juvenile transfer program, which, we're trying to look for more additional funds for our core initiative. So, yeah, yeah, anything and everything justice. Hey, who would have known that I'd had all this present, all this stuff, all this justice involvement to just turn around and be able to give it right back to the justice system.
Well, I think the justice system needs people like
They
you. I'm
do, they do.
really happy to see peer recovery grow. I started my career more than 15 years ago as public defender, and that wasn't part of the model back then.
Yeah,
And it's a critical piece of the model. People
yeah.
need to be able to have that interaction, that understanding, that relationship with somebody who understands what they're going through. And often those are the only people who can get through to people who are going through it. And it makes tons of sense, right? It's shared human experience.
Well, and I always say, if you really, really, really want to know what peer support actually is and where it was founded, read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Silkworth, a prominent physician, clearly said in all of his years of treating alcoholics, and this is written 1934. He said there is no better treatment than an alcoholic sharing his experience with another alcoholic. And that program was founded on meeting them where they're at,
Yeah.
going into the institutions, talking to them. Like Bill W. said to his wife, I've been going to the hospital for 6 months, talking to him about, my spiritual experience and this and that, and nobody's getting sober. And she goes, "You are, right?" The greatest gift of giving somebody back what has been given to you. And I'm really thankful for all the volunteers that the prison system let in, to introduce Alcoholics Anonymous into my life because it's the biggest support and value network of peers that I have in my life that and a lot of people think, well, I can't do the 12 steps. I'm like, well, outside of being an alcoholic or outside of, labeling myself a drug addict, we look at the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and basically it's just being a good human, really. Like I think the 12 steps are really for everybody. And it created a design for living for me, relying on a new, coping strategy, taking inventory and of all of my wrongs and then making amends and going through the process of being of service to not only Alcoholics Anonymous and its participants, but also to my community. The community was the biggest thing. So I'm gonna read you this. I got this letter today. It's an award letter. It says, "Dear Sanctuary Recovery Centers, the Administrative Office of the Courts and the County Juvenile Probation Department have reviewed the 24-26 open and continuous application for juvenile treatment services submitted by Sanctuary. The purpose of this letter is to advise you of the services which have been accepted and to outline additional AOC required information as need to fully execute your AOC contract. Um, yeah.
That's
So
amazing. Congratulations.
yeah,
Such a good feeling to see.
yeah,
Is this
yeah.
your first big contract with the AOC?
Yeah, yeah. So it's, we have we treat adolescents here at Sanctuary Recovery Center, and a lot of them, DCS, CPS involvement. We also know that the courts also are the frontliners in the introduction to the justice system, and good probation officers lead to good outcomes, I believe. And if the probation officer knows who we are and we can provide a service to help that individual graduate probation or, live a fulfilling life, then, we want to be a part of that story. So
I
it
love
was big
that.
for us. I've been working on it for months.
How big is your treatment organization now?
Sanctuary Recovery Centers has 16 locations. We have the continuum of care. So we don't do detox. We're not a BHIF, but we're a BHRF. So residential 3.5 according to the ASAM model of continuum of care. Then we have PHP, partial hospitalization programming, IOP, intensive outpatient programming, and then we have outpatient programming. We have four behavioral health residential facilities, and we have adolescent. We have a women's program, and that women's program is connected to the STIR network, out of ASU, Women of Sex Trafficking. We're also one of the only providers that take women full term in their pregnancy. A lot of providers, on the back end of their pregnancy kind of get, after 10 weeks, they're like, maybe 12 weeks, then we cut it off. But
Yeah.
we are a full term service provider. Um, and then we have two male residential facilities. And then our housing, we have transitional housing for our outpatient programming. But we have sober living. So, if somebody comes in, and we've had individuals that have come through our residential, go through our IOP, do our bed or our outpatient, and then live in sober living for a couple of years and then come work for us. So
Amazing.
we've seen that full circle moment. And our CEO is one of them. Joey Lennon's one of them. He got out of prison in 2010, went to TLC, got kicked out for a dirty UA, landed in Sanctuary Sober Living, which it was only one house at the time, and lived there for a couple of years, and then came back and bought that property, um, and expanded to 16 locations that we have today. So yeah.
A lot.
We're
What an
we're
incredible
full
story.
of, yeah, we're full of we're definitely the pure model over here. We believe that friends helping friends, right?
Yeah, well, I
That's it.
think that's a model that works. And, to your point with Alcoholics Anonymous has worked for almost 100 years. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think what life is about, right?
Yeah.
What does the future hold for you?
So more schooling. I have my goal is to go to ASU, not ASU, but NAU. NAU has what's called the 90/30 program. So that basically I can do 90 credits at my community college and then transfer and get the additional 10 classes, and get the degree from the major university. NAU, GCU, they're the ones that do the 90/30 programs. ASU doesn't. I think U of A might, but I'm not sure. U of A is in Tucson, so it's going to be a little of, out of my reach. But if I take two more courses, which I'm meeting with my academic life coach, John Bastion from Rio Salado next week, we're going to sign up. I'm probably going to take an accounting course and probably another computer information systems course, just because technology is my area of struggle, area of weakness. Um, and if hopefully by this time, or not this time next year, but in the fall, in the spring, I'll be the first man by blood to break the addiction cycle and attend a major university in
Amazing.
my family. Yeah, alcoholism and drug addiction has plagued all the men in my family dating all the way back to the 1920s.
Wow.
So,
What a
yeah.
cycle to be able to break.
Obviously, I look at Joey and I'm like, what's next? I know that we are going to expand services. We've doubled our census over the course of the last 3 months as a result of, opening up our reentry program for women and men stepping down out of incarceration or county jail system. Yeah, it's beautiful. I wake up, I have a wife, I go fishing, I like to go to the gym, I have a vehicle that I like, but I'm ready to get a new one, and to be looking at, new cars, right? Something you got to ask me freaking 15 years ago to have been a new used bike that I'm scoping out and, trying to steal. And here I am looking at, new Toyotas and stuff. It's interesting. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's so much easier when you're just sober and show up to work on time. It seems like everything else just subsides itself.
Yeah,
Everything just
well, it's
falls
a
into
lot of work
place.
you put on yourself, right? Put into your own journey to get here. So,
Yeah. And it
um,
was Edwin Lewis Cole said that maturity doesn't come with age. It comes with the amount of responsibility somebody wants to take for their life, right? And that's why I credit like all these kids when I see them so young and graduating college. I always need to shake their hand and let them know how important it is, and how good they're doing because, you put that stuff off and you can subject yourself to a pathway that just you find disagreeable later on down the road.
I always like to ask people on the other side, right? What advice they have for somebody who maybe is still very much struggling, very much cycling in and out of the system. What would you say to that person?
That there's hope. I mean, hope is the driving force. I mean, like I know that it might seem uncomfortable, like change always is, but it's necessary. And engage in the programming. Learn how to rewire your brain. Focus on what the message is that's being delivered to you. I was absolutely ignorant to understanding the value of self-worth and what that meant, and I thought that I had had something, but I didn't. And when I realized I had nothing, I found everything, right? And so finding everything is putting love into the things you do. And if we talk about values, I've had so many individuals raise their hands to the first five values, and that is sobriety, freedom, financial security, family, having, a good job. Like those are so common amongst prisoners. Okay, so we got to learn how to reconnect with our values, right? And the only way we do it is if we bond ourselves to them, and show up for you, right? Because if you ain't got you, you ain't got nobody, you know,
Right, you gotta love yourself first.
and ask for help. I didn't know how to love myself. I had to ask for help. I had to learn, through program of recovery, education. Education was a huge lift in self-esteem. Um, but yeah, education and programming. Obviously, it's like it's easy. You want to look at your track record. You've been in and out, cycling through this. Let's look at your data. Your data doesn't lie, right? Math don't lie. You need help. And the only way you're going to do it is if you're vulnerable enough to ask for it. So ask for help.
I love that. And my last question is, why do you think campaigns like this are important?
Well, it's important because, people ask, did you vote? And I've, gone through things in my life where I just said, well, I can't vote. You know, I can't vote, and then you look at our political dynamic and you see what's going on. You're like, gosh, I wish, maybe my vote does count, right? Lobbying, for legislation and, having a voice and taking your rights back. It's like you were given a name and it's important. And when something's taken from you, something's missing. And so putting the pieces of your life back together concerning, whether it's getting a fingerprint clearance card, getting a passport, getting your ID, getting your rights restored. Um, I'm in the process of doing that. I went through the Village Network. They helped me as soon as I got out.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. And Rochelle's helped my brother. So we're in the process of, getting my letter that I'm putting together about what I'm doing now, to, do some, I guess that's for the set aside,
Hmm.
how that begins. And it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling. I got to write a whole letter about where I'm at today compared to where I was at, 15 years ago, smoking crack and digging in ashtrays. No judgment upon myself here, but
Made
it's
so
just
much progress to,
looking back, I don't know who that person is. I made a decision to be vulnerable and ask for help. So getting your name back means everything. When I got out, I went to the DMV and I was sitting there and I was getting my identification card. And I asked the lady, I said, how many times have I came in here to get a new ID? And she looked at me like in shock. She's like, you really want to know? I was like, yeah. She said 17 times.
wow.
So 17 times I had gone to the DMV to get a new ID because I had thrown myself away that many times.
Wow.
Whether I lost my wallet, it all is a product of a lack of self-awareness, right? So it was important for me that to know that this would be the last time I'd ever come back, and get something that turns out I needed to get a travel ID. So that was 19, now 19 times. But I have a
It's
travel
really
ID.
interesting though, that many times just like literally losing your identity, really just losing yourself over and over again. And so
Yeah.
many people
So if
get
I did that physically, how many times did I do that mentally?
yeah. Yeah.
You know, um, you know, uh, growing up and having that overwhelming fear of failure, the overwhelming fear of abandonment, and all these different things that follow us into our adulthood, unfortunately, it doesn't go away, right? Like we learn how to reprocess it, we learn how to cope with it, we learn how to deal with it. But I still have a really, really easy way of becoming my own biggest critic, beating myself down into a corner, feeling like when I'm at places like the Mercy Care conference, like an imposter, right? Like, it's like, these things we overcome. And I think there's no greater overcoming than the person who's able to take him out of that type of darkness where, suicidal ideation takes place or serious drug addiction and homelessness and re-traumatization. Um, you overcome that and you put yourself in a position to be successful. Um, Not many people live through that. Not many people
For
can
sure.
can say that that's how they did it.